Well, first of all, thank you very much for your warm welcome, Jocelyn. It's very nice. And I'm very pleased that I've been asked to speak to you today because I feel very passionate about this topic of student mental health. Personally, I was the first person in my family to go to university, and I've witnessed firsthand the sort of empowerment and ability to change that you have by attending university. And I've always felt very passionate about education and fairness of access. So I've worked as a psychotherapist for about 30 years now, and over 20 years of those years, I was working within a university. First, I was working as a counselor, then I work as a university head of the university counselling service, and my last role was at the University of Cambridge, where I was head of counselling. So I had a very large team of counsellors, mental health advisors, mindfulness teacher, and sexual assault and harassment advisor. So now I've established myself and I work independently. I have chaired a number of national groups pertaining to student mental health, which has really helped to sort of broaden my focus to just looking at the university I was part on, but really across the sector. And I work internationally as well. I've collaborated with colleagues in the US and in China. And now I'm on the European Association for International Education, and we have a guidance group for university and guidance sector, which is really helpful. So it's really good to sort of think very broadly and to think about the need, not just of the students in the university we're working in, but also of the students across the sector learning from each other in different universities, and also thinking about the specific needs of international students as a cohort. I mean, I was myself an international student many years ago when I first came to the UK. I will be well, I think it's over 20 years, over 30 years now. And I was an international student, so I was an Erasmus international student. So it's something that's very close to my heart, thinking about the cohort of international students and what their needs are. So I'm joining you today live from Cambridge in the UK, where I live, and I have Lebanese friends as well. So I know that the situation in Lebanon has been extremely challenging with the previous histories of the war, the more recent economic collapse, and the tragedy that affected me. And my friend will often talk to me about the challenges that a family face. So my heart really goes out to Lebanese people, and I'm very grateful that I'm able to speak to you. And if I can make a small difference by helping people, then I would be very pleased with that. So in this workshop today, we will consider the current discourse surrounding student mental health and look at different strategies, tools, and the information to support student mental health and well-being so that they can learn and reach their full potential. It is a very broad topic. I mean, I could speak to you all day very happily about student mental health, but we only have an hour. So let me start by briefly outlining what I will cover today. So in this session, we will look at why well-being is important, consider the current discourse surrounding student mental health, looking at strategies for universities, and then tools and information to support students' mental health and well-being so that they're able to learn and reach their full potential. Before I move on to the next slide, I'd like you to pause for a second, okay? So have a think, and why do you think well-being matters? So feel free to use the chat if you want, the chat function, if you want to share that, or just to make a mental note as you wish. There is no pressure either way. But have a think about why well-being matters. We will have different views, so it's not, a question of being right or wrong. It's just about thinking from your own perspective about why do you think well-being matters. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a minute to think about that. Yep, somebody's using the chat function. Thank you for that. We come once to the life and we deserve to live it with a peaceful mindset. Yep, that's a very good point, Ibrahim. Thank you for that. So this is about sort of personal well-being, isn't it? And our ability to enjoy our life. So let me tell you what I think it's important to have well-being. So hold on. So well-being matters for many different reasons. And you might think that it matters because it impacts on our ability to be happy, And I see that Andy has put something as well in the chat. Being both physically and emotional fit is the key to success in all aspects of life. Well, that's a very good definition. I agree. It's sort of very encompassing. And we might think that well-being impacts on our ability to be happy, and for that very reason, it's important to address it. It makes the overcoming and moving forward in life smooth. That's right, Malak. That's a very good point as well. But now I'm going to think more like an economist, right? So if you think about well-being, it helps us. So I'm going to take a very narrow focus and think about the university context, right? So well-being impacts on a student's ability to engage with university life, study and enjoy life, right? Because if students don't have any well-being, their capacity to engage with university life, study and enjoy life is affected. So when you think about universities having, limited budget in terms of what they can do, that's one of the reasons they would fund a university counseling service, because we know from research that our ability to learn and function is impacted by our well-being, right? So well-being does not just affect the students themselves, but it also affects their network, right? So if somebody is unhappy, that person's unhappy, impacts on their ability to study, but it will also impact on their network. Their friends will be worried about them, their family, they'll be on the phone, they'll wonder what they can do. Maybe they'll drive up to the university to see them. The tutors, the teachers will worry about that very students, and the support staff in the department. So you can see that the well-being is having an impact on the students, on the system around them, on the institution, because universities recruit students. They want their students to then be able to succeed. And then if their students are able to succeed, they go on and they're successful in society, right? So for instance, they might become a doctor, or they might become a lawyer, or they can become a teacher. There's loads of different things that they're able to do. So that's what Gail has put in the chat, that people with high level of well-being are more productive at work and more likely to contribute to their communities. So it's exactly that reason why in an academic context of a university, well-being matters, right? But it also have many other reasons, like our personal development, our general happiness, all those sorts of things. So colleagues and I wrote a paper in 2019 when we looked about the difference between the needs of students with either mental health issues or well-being, right? So we argue that there is a need for a greater clarity and consistency in the use of terminology. So for instance, we need to think differently about student well-being, so somebody needing to function versus somebody with a mental health issue, because they will require different interventions of level of support. So people often think about mental health as a dichotomy. You either have mental health issues or you don't have mental health issues. But in fact, mental health, we say, exist on a continuum, which is why I'm using this sort of line with 2 hours, because we move up and down that continuum, right? So at time we're feeling very well and we have very strong mental health, and at other time we struggle in our life, and we can be at the very high functioning or very low functioning. And a person with a diagnosed mental health issue, even a severe mental health issue or a severe mental health diagnosis, can manage very well with the right support. They might be on medication, and someone without any previous identified issues would not be sort of meeting the threshold for a mental health diagnosis, can really struggle because of different stresses, such as an exam stress or bereavement, right? Therefore, it can be very difficult to identify symptoms of declining mental health and say whether somebody has got good mental health or bad mental health, right? So now that we've looked a little bit about the sector of sort of student and the importance of well-being, I would like you to think about it, right? So we know that well-being is important. So who is responsible for student mental health or well-being? Would you say that it's the university that's responsible for the student mental health of its student? Would you say the student is responsible for their own mental health and well-being, or is society responsible for the student and their mental health and well-being? So Please don't use the chat for now, but have a think about that because we'll be revisiting this slide. Yeah, and I'd like you to think about it and maybe make a note of what you think because we'll be looking at after the next sort of 10, 15 minutes, I'll be asking you that question again. Yeah. So have a think about it. Who do you think is responsible? The university, the student, or society? And maybe make a note of that, right? So in my therapist role, I've helped many students and the staff who support them to adapt to crisis situation, personal bereavement, changes, as well as coping with the aftermath of war or national disaster. This could be broadly framed as resilience, which we will look at in a moment, and falls under the category of the personal, the individual, in our case, the student. However, in my head of counseling and in my consultancy roles, I've also helped many universities develop their mental health and well-being strategy and support structure. So we're looking at this sort of university. And I've also worked with organization and foundation where they look at the societal need of people with regard to their mental health and well-being. So that's different example at which time where we have the individual, the university, and the society. So let's look at each one of this category in more detail, thinking about what it means in theory and in practice. So let's think about the individual responsibility firstly. Clearly, there are things that we do that can have an impact on our mental health. When we think that it is the individual who's responsible for their well-being, we often touch on the concept of resilience. And as I'm talking about university audience today, I'm very aware of the theoretical and moral aspects of the concept of resilience, and that resilience can be seen as a politically laden term. Certainly when I talk to student union in the UK about the needs of students, they really get quite prickly, understandably, because often people use resilience in a very negative way and blaming people for not looking after themselves and not taking personal responsibility. If we think about a context, international cultural and societal differences make using psychological dimensions challenging. I think it's particularly important when we think of a very westernized frame of reference that emanates from a certain cultural concept. For instance, an American student from the USA might think, and again, I'm making very broad strokes, so if there are any American people in the audience, I'm not saying that everybody feels that way, but you could see it that thinking of well-being as relating to self-actualization, linking to an individually societal viewpoint, right? Whilst the Chinese students on the other end of the spectrum might favor a collective responsibility and a sense of duty towards their family. So when I talk about resilience, I'm not talking about shifting responsibility onto individual citizens and local communities, such as university students, where individuals get blamed for not bouncing back, not trying hard enough, not being resilient enough. And you hear about people talking about students, about them being snowflakes, they're melting the slow because they're so weak now. People in my days were much stronger, and now students are snowflakes and they melt, and they should just toughen up. And that is why resilience can get a sort of bad reputation, really. However, even if I don't think that resilience is the responsibility solely of the individual, I do think that there is a place for personal responsibility. And societal and external changes can be very slow. And in the meantime, for those changes to happen, we have to try to find ways to maintain our own well-being. We can't just say it's society or it's the university's responsibility. So if you're interested in the critique of the concept of resilience, I've included a reference to an article at the end of my presentation. So you'll be able to look that up if you're interested. And it's Simon and David article, A Critical Review of the Definition of Wellbeing for a Doctor and Their Patient in a Post-COVID-19 Era. So I'd recommend, if you're interested in that, to have a look at it. It was a really good article. So if we think about resilience, what do we mean by resilience? So the American Psychological Association, APA, which is a very influential professional body, defined resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or even significant sources of stress. Whilst this definition is useful, it does not reflect the complex nature of resilience. There are many factors, biological, psychological, social, and cultural, that interact with one another to determine how we are able to respond to stressful experience and how this in turn affects our well-being. So having briefly looked at the individual and their responsibility towards well-being and mental health, now let's look at the university. So our responsibility of the university towards mental health of its students. Well, you could say that the university provides counseling to help students, but first of all, and this is probably sounds obvious, but it's really important that reacting to the student's mental health issue is the last resort, right? Just knowing that you have a counseling service doesn't mean that you treat students thinking that they can always get fixed in counseling. Really, what you're trying to do is to prevent issues in students, right? So you're thinking about prevention first and foremost. So in the UK, the government encourages a whole university approach to well-being and mental health, supporting prevention and early intervention. This initiative is called Step Change, Mentally Healthy Health in HE. And I've put a link to this framework at the end of my presentation. And there is also another program, a mental health charter, that university can voluntarily sign up to demonstrate their commitment to the issue. Okay. So this is a whole university approach to mental health, and I'll talk at more length about that. But really what it means is what you're thinking of the student journey from the time before people come to university, the time they apply to come to university, to the time in which they graduate, and post-graduation. Every person in the university should think about what they're doing and the impact on students and their mental health. So it's a very, very broad concept. And I will look into more details in a minute, right? So first of all, let's think about the university and how it will decide on the direction of travel, its strategy. So well-being strategy that we are encouraged to have if we use the UUK step change framework. First point is you lead from the front and you have a well-being strategy. And the university strategy should have clear action points. It shows that the university is committed to providing a healthy environment to study. So it's making a commitment. And this commitment is seen in the context of the university wider mission, including what's set out in its learning and teaching strategy. So the university is here to help students to learn and to teach them, but even doing that is thinking about the impact on the student well-being and mental health. And each different institution need to identify their own specific goal and strategies. So that's really important because, of course, if I think of the different institutions I worked in, they've all had very different needs. They had different student population. They had different courses. So you couldn't really say that when I worked at Birmingham City University, which is a local university in the West Midlands, in the centre of England, a lot of people from very varied backgrounds, some of them coming first time at university, quite poor. And then the University of Cambridge, which is, one of the top universities in the world, always in the top 5. The students there are very different. So each university really need to think about where they are located, the students that they have, the courses that they have, and then develop a strategy that meets the needs of a student. In the same way, St. Anthony University would have a very different mindset if they were setting a well-being strategy than the University of Manchester, for instance, because they have different institutions. So research on the promotion of well-being shows us that for well-being strategy to be valuable, they have to affect all levels of the institution. So one way of embedding this is to improve staff training. We'll look at that in a minute. And when I run staff training event, I always ask staff to reflect before going back to their desk. It might be helpful to think about how in your practice or that of your department impact on student well-being. Okay, so if you are a staff, for instance, in the university department as well, I could encourage you to think about how your practice or that of your department impacts on student well-being. Okay, so you could have a think that could be a takeaway exercise for you today. And is there any room for improvement in the way in which you're working or processing that will have a direct impact on student well-being? Are there things that you do particularly well that you could be sharing with colleagues across the sector, or things you might want to learn about it? So when we're thinking about well-being, we're thinking about the whole person and the amount of work expected of the students or the mark that they're aiming for. So in the context of elite university, for instance, where the focus is on excellence, it can be very hard to know when to stop, yeah, because people always want to thrive and do better. And staff are not always the best role model if they're working all hours to achieve in their role. For instance, answering emails in the middle of the night or not taking holidays or working all throughout the weekend. And it can set a culture of overworking, and perfectionism can be an issue. So you're thinking about changing the culture of the university. So you're thinking about helping to give a more realistic message about unhealthy, for instance, level of perfectionism to students. So you're shifting, for instance, the thing from perfectionism towards healthy thriving. And what would that look like for your students? When I work with students directly, I often talk to students about the need to pace themselves, the need to maintain an overall level of health. So, yesterday we had the London Marathon, for instance, and I talked to people about using a marathon mindset rather than running a sprint, right? I am not a runner myself. In fact, I like swimming, but I have enough friends who are runners who train to do marathon, and I can see the way they pace themselves, and they will do gradually increasing. And the way, for instance, the week before they do the marathon, they don't do any like long run. But if people are training to run for a sprint, it's very different. It's very quick. You need very different strategies. But university is long. It's 3, 4, 5, 6 years of study, depending on what you're doing. So you really need to pace yourself. You can't just be going at 100% an hour because that's not working. So you need to find a way in which you can sustain the level of work at which you are without burning out. And that can be hard because if people have a real investment into being the best in their field, to say that they need to dim the lights a little bit so they last longer can be really quite challenging, I think. So we'll talk about the training and initiative and well-being for staff in a minute. And I'll give example of engaging with the student and the staff body to seek their views. And I told you about the importance of having a well-being strategy that's sort of led from the top. So different universities have different ways of doing it, but sometimes people have a project board at senior level with sort of vice chancellor and pro vice chancellor looking at well-being strategies. So when we thought about the strategy, now let's think about the processes. How do you put that in place in the university? So we said about it's a whole university approach. We have to be focusing on prevention and minimizing the stress we put on students by being organized, for instance, having a clear strategy and goals and processes so people know what they're doing. So we're looking at prevention to minimize risk of unnecessary stress of students. So you need a good governance. So the university needs to be well managed, have clear finances, for instance, clear processes. If there are any problem, you need to have complaint procedures. You need to have clear policies and line and responsibilities. So, you tell students what they have to do. The staff know what they have to do, the different administrative part of the university, because it's very stressful for a student to go and see one person, they go tell one thing, and then they go and see another and they tell another one. So having very clear is very important, and having the lead from senior leadership. So the senior leadership is showing us that it's important to think about well-being. So for instance, a supportive induction program for new students is very important, having clear and easily accessible advice, explaining where and how to seek help, having staff training program to raise awareness and increase staff confidence, regular reporting and reviews to have a cycle of continuous improvement. So the well-being agenda needs to be embedded across the institution. So it's important to sort of collaborate across the department. For instance, you can have the health and safety department, the sports department, and external services, the general doctors or psychiatrists. When I worked in university, there were a lot of committees across the university, too many really, and perhaps you have the same issue in Lebanon, and I don't know. And on all of those, we had student reps, which encouraged collaboration with the student body. They were involved in the work we did, and we got some really helpful feedback. And those relationships helped to create best practice. For instance, they would be in my office making suggestions about how to help improve our counseling self-referral form. And I remember they were very diligent students. I had 47 comments on how to improve the form. We also saw them during the exam working party, helping to spread the message and understand students' perspective. And having this committee where we had student reps really helped with coordination. Otherwise, you can have a lot of initiative and very little direction. And having the students co-creating with us mean that it's very relevant for the student body, because I might be thinking that something is a good idea, and the students who might say, well, that won't be very well received, but we could try it in that way. So when I talk about the support available in university, I talk about embedded services. I believe they deliver the best possible service to students. For instance, counseling services, the impact of an embedded service is manifold. So one, counseling services were first established in universities in the 1960s. Many offered therapy in the therapeutic bubble, that it is best not to be contaminated by working in the institution, so people would have a sort of counseling. Sometimes they had a house outside of campus because they wanted students to feel that it was really separate. However, now we work very differently, and we're thinking about university counseling services that are embedded in the institution that they serve, so they can listen to the students and then distill the experience of many students and give it back to the institution as a very helpful thing. Or they could run workshops or groups for students. They can offer online counseling, develop well resources. They liaise with academic and pastoral staff and offer consultation across the institution. And in the reference slide, you will see that I've included Patty Wallace research, which demonstrate that the counseling service impacts on much more than just the individual client that they see. That they also affect the group, the staff and student, the institution, and even society at large. For instance, in the case of a depressed student, the service might see the student themselves, support their friends, advise their personal tutor, and especially student service advisor. It reaches many people across the institution. And also outside, if you think of the impact on the student family and their future career. So on this slide, you can see the example of things that we know to be useful in practice when we work with students. We help to support well-being and resilience, focus on prevention, workload, exam, induction, using appropriate policies, working collaboratively across the university to share good practice, signposting to appropriate services, counseling services, or welfare for staff. So let me give you an example of working across the institution. We had a working group on undergraduate student workload, which we established in response to concern raised about the impact of workload on students' educational experience. So we were able to outline the expected hours of private studies, supported by reading lists in which core reading and supporting material and advanced reading are clearly identified, so that it helps students to kind of manage and learn how much that they have to do. Allocating, for instance, Wi-Fi free spaces where students could study without interference. Harmonizing examinations, so it helps with revision. So sometimes we have students who had like 4 exams in one day and then nothing for 2 days. So trying to kind of spread it out so it's less stressful on one day. And then helping the first year students who just left school arriving at university. So rather than making it very, very hard from the beginning, maybe starting more gradually and then increasing the pressure as they develop their skills. So really thinking about students working and how can we make it that we still want them to work hard and want them to get good results, but we're making it like a more gradual process so that they're more able to kind of engage with it rather than get super stressed. So having looked at the individual and the university responsibility, let's focus on what can be done collectively to enhance the mental health of individuals, families, and communities by using a public health approach. So a public mental health approach is concerns about promoting mental health well-being in the general population. Yeah. So you've got your counseling service, and I'll show you in a minute, is really the top of the support pyramid for students. So we're thinking about this is society. How can we do in society things that help promote the mental well-being of everyone? Yeah. And we're thinking about developing things that really reach out. So for instance, you can use, I don't know, social media or education to promote mental health messages. So let's have a look at how that can work. So in the UK, we have this message: is the 5 ways to well-being. I don't know if you have a similar one in Lebanon. So it has 5 different strands. So connecting with other people, right? And all those strands are things have been researched and demonstrated to have a positive impact on the mental well-being of the individual, right? And we're trying to spread them at the level of the population, because people might think, well, how do I improve my well-being? You know, it's all well and good, but how do I do that? You might know more as university students and staff, but we're thinking about everyone, yeah, in society. So we know that connecting with other people is important. So good relationships are important for mental well-being. They can help people build a sense of belonging and self-worth. They can give an opportunity to share positive experiences, provide emotional support, and allow you to support others. So that's the first strand of the 5 ways to well-being. We know that being physically active is not just great for your physical health and your fitness, but it also demonstrates by research that it improves mental well-being by raising self-esteem, helping you to set goals or challenge and achieve them. It causes chemical changes in your brain which help to positively change your mood. So that can be really helpful. Learning new skills, again, that's been shown by research as improving mental health being. It boosts self-confidence, raises self-esteem. It helps to build a sense of purpose, and it can help you to connect with others when you're learning, depending on how you're learning. If you go on a course, for instance. Giving to others is also seen as helping to improve your own personal well-being. Research suggests that the act of giving and kindness can help to improve your mental well-being by creating positive feelings and a sense of reward, giving you a feeling of purpose and self-worth, and it helps you connect to other people. I mean, you should give to people because it's good, not just because it benefits you, but we also know that it benefits you. And we know that paying attention to the present moment, which sometimes is called mindfulness, it can improve mental well-being. So people who are thinking too much about the past or too much about the future, it can be quite stressful or quite difficult. So we're helping people to kind of focus in the moment. And you can learn technique through mindfulness or relaxation or meditation, prayer, whatever it is that people do. I like going into nature, for instance, going for a walk, looking at the outside world. And during this mindful moment, which can include, you know, learning more about your thoughts, your feelings, your body, and the world around you. And some people call this awareness mindfulness, and that can help you to enjoy life more and understand yourself better. So this is a sort of societal level focus on mental health and well-being and prevention. So you're teaching society as large these 5 ways to well-being. And that can be adapted in the university context where you're giving students opportunities to develop and engage in those skills. Obviously, the learning bit in university, we've got that covered because we're learning new things all of the time, whether we're staff or students. But, you know, giving opportunity, for instance, to be active, you know, having sports services, not just sort of elite sport, because sometimes you see it, you know, this sort of like the university basketball team or the university football team, or if you're in Cambridge, the rowing element, and the people who are sort of winning medals for the university. But really activities for the people like me, or not very sporty, or the people who are disabled, or the people who don't like being wearing very fancy outfits when they go. So you're thinking about everyone doing exercise and the need to connect. So we do a lot in universities now where we help students to connect with each other and develop skills and set up sort of social element, or maybe playing game nights, or having activities while they watch film together. Mindfulness can be taught in university, or you can have some information on your website about how to be more mindful. An opportunity to give, so people doing volunteering in university can be really helpful. So that's the sort of more societal ways of thinking about mental health and well-being. So I told you at the beginning that I would ask you this question again. So who do you think now is responsible for student mental health and well-being? Has it changed at all? So it'd be really helpful if I could hear it in the chat, if you have changed your mind or you haven't, or we can talk about it at the end in the Q&A. Do you still think the same as when you did when I started talking? Or have you changed your mind about who's responsible for students' mental health and well-being? Do you feel free to share that in the chat if you can? Okay, so Patricia is saying the 3 areas are important. Okay. Everybody thinking it's the 3 areas? Well, if you are, I'm really pleased to hear that, because that's exactly okay. So Malak, I said it's on the 3 parties, but in different ranges. Exactly. Yeah. Because there are things that are the domain of the university, so it's their responsibility to change it, but there are things that the individual has to change. So it's in their remit, really, isn't it? And society and the university and the student don't function on their own. They're part of society. So it's also an important part. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. Yeah, Rita is also saying the 3 are responsible. Yeah. So in my mind, it's everyone's responsibility. You can't just say it's all on the students. You can't just say it's all on society, or you can't just say it's all on the university. I think all 3 play their part, and if they work well together, then that really helps to move things forward. So now let's think about the context of university when people come to university. So I think of university as being a unique time in a person's life. We can identify particular stresses related to this life stage. And I know that in the UK, at least, or in the US, stresses are not helped by the narrative surrounding this university's experience, that students should be having the time of their life. Yeah. I know that it's definitely not in each country, because certainly when I was a student in France, there was no sense that we were having the time of our life. You just went to university to study. There was no pressure to enjoy yourself or to think that was the most amazing experience. But I know in some countries, university time is supposed to be this very special time. And while many students do have fun, it's a new experience which can be stressful at times. An undergraduate might be managing themselves in a new environment, potentially for the first time if they're living away from home. And we know that change can be disorienting. So if you have experienced this when you were promoted maybe to your present role, if you're a member of staff, so we know that change can be stressful. A friend of mine who just got promoted to a professorship in a different institution. As a professor, she certainly is used to working in university. She's hugely competent, yet as she's out of her comfort zone, she feels up and down at times and doubts her own ability, right? And that's for a professor. So possibly much harder for a young undergraduate or a person who might be older but is new to university, or is studying to do a doctorate, PhD, which is entirely different than what they've done before. So working in a university is a very competitive environment. We get graded, as universities. Students get graded, they get assessed. We have league tables, we have exam marks, so we're constantly being marked. So it can be difficult to keep some balance in our life as we strive to succeed. But it's equally important to make time for the things that do not directly promote our career or improve our grades. We know that investing in ourselves works better in the long run. We often talk to my clients about pacing themselves, as I've told you before, and thinking in terms of preparing themselves to run for a marathon rather than a sprint. However, Just saying to students that stress is a normal part of life is not enough. We need to teach students the tool that they need to adapt and adjust. And these tools need to reflect their specific needs as students, tailored to their need as research students, international, disabled, or care living students. And adapting to change and developing coping strategy, which helps to develop resilience, can be part of the curriculum, asking students what they need to cope and thrive, co-producing strategies with them. Because, as I told you earlier, it can be difficult to identify symptoms of declining mental health. Many universities have made significant investment in specialist services such as counseling and mental health. As well as working with students, they have a proactive role to play and can offer advice and consultation to staff, develop resources on how to work with students with mental health issues. Many universities will have this layered approach to identifying and responding students with mental health issues. So expecting staff to support and refer rather than work with the level of distress that they shouldn't have to manage. So you can see this pyramid represent how more and more specialized the level of support becomes, and at each level of the level of knowledge that staff need to identify in students. So you start for a very broad base with preventative wellbeing initiatives. You move on to academic tutorial and other staff, specialist university post, and then external services will refer out for specialist service. So all of these will have different levels of need and different levels of training. So when we're thinking about well-being, we're thinking about everyone. We're thinking about the students, but we're also thinking about the staff, because it can't be that we do everything for the students at the expense of staff. I mean, certainly in the UK at the moment, there are big strikes in university because people are saying they're just working too hard, they need more resources. And I know that is something when I speak to my European colleagues, which is reflected in other institutions. So we've looked at the things that we can do in society to help promote well-being and mental health. We've looked at what the university can do, but we also looked about what the individual can do. And if the individual is struggling, I've put together some resources for you that might be helpful, depending on what the issues are. So these are online resources, they're all open access. So the Mental Health Foundation is a UK foundation which thinks about mental health at the level of society. They have some very good resources on it. Student Mind is a student charity working directly with students, and Student Space is one of the resources that they have where there is a lot of self-help information for students. Mind is another charity in the UK which sort of helps people with mental health issues. So they have some very, very useful leaflets on there. And then I know that there is a university counselling in your institution, which might have some more resources that are specific to people in Lebanon. So, you know, when we're saying about the whole university approach to mental health, for instance, Student Mind, I do some work with them, training accommodation providers. So in the UK, a lot of people stay in halls, away from home, and they're in student accommodation. And with Student Mind, I help training the people in the accommodation services so that if they identify students that having mental health issues, they're more able to respond and help them. And they look at the policies and procedures of the accommodation provider and seeing how they are or might be impacting on student mental health and how they can improve. So that's just one example of a whole institution approach to mental health. So this is bringing my presentation to the training for staff. So we're thinking about the different level of training that's available for staff. So if you're thinking about developing a well-being strategy, you identify the different staffs and the sort of things that would be helpful for them. So there's online package on suicide prevention, for instance, or you can do induction to university support services. So when I worked as a head of counselling, I used to deliver induction to staff new to the university, work directly with tutor, helping them to train them. I told you about the accommodation, staff training. So you can give training on boundaries, communication skills, supporting students with mental health issues, and offer a reflective practice group that people can learn more about that. So this is an example of a free e-learning package that's available for staff. So if some of you are staff in the institution and you want to learn more about student mental health, you can go on this Charlie Waller Memorial Trust training. You can use this link and you can access the online training, and it's free and it's really helpful. It's 6 easy to follow 20-minute session when we're thinking about signs to look out for in student mental health, key helping skills, knowing who else to involve in supporting students at risk or in crisis. So I was one of the people who developed this training package as a group of heads of university counseling service who reviewed it. So I think it's really important for us to be thinking about how we can help and support students, because for me, considering higher education as a unique stage in a person's life, it's an opportunity to act with interventions that are very impactful because they resonate at many different levels. First of all, there's a question of fairness. If a student with mental health issue comes to university, they shouldn't be penalized whilst at university. It's important that we support them. It's a key period. So if students are supported whilst at university, they can go on to have a career, manage their difficulty and succeed. There's an increased recognition of the importance of students' progression, the learning gain, and the employment outcome, and how well-being can impact on those. And it's an investment. It's worth it. If we can support students, it'll make a difference, a direct impact on their life and that of others. And there's a what I call a ripple effect, because if a student can succeed whilst they're at university, it will also impact positively on their family, community, and ultimately society. They will become the people we work and found companies, technological companies, the professionals, the lawyers, the teachers, the leaders of the future, the academic working in our universities, our doctors and teachers. We need them to succeed and learn coping strategy that they will use in their career in the future and go on to support others. So this concludes my presentation. So we have just under 10 minutes for any questions that you may have. So I just need to exit the presentation. So thank you very much for listening and contribution in the chat function. If you are able to turn on your camera, it's always nice to see the people I'm speaking to. I can see that there's over 50 of you, but maybe not all of you can turn on your camera, but maybe some of you can.
Ms. Geraldine, I just want to thank you for the session. It was lovely. I had with me Father Jean and Dr. Marie Khouri, who's the psychotherapist giving counseling and awareness sessions at the university. And the presentation was lovely. This is Dr. Marie. I don't know if she
hello.
would like to say
hello,
hi.
Dr. Hello.
It was amazing.
Thank you.
And this is Father Jean.
Hello, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Hello.
So I don't know if the students have any question or anything that they would like to learn more about. Brahim sent a question in the chat box.
Okay, brilliant. Yes, I think that's a very good point, Ibrahim. Is it acceptable to have resilience in most challenging yet struggle deeply with one major issues that you've not been able to overcome in a healthy manner? Absolutely. That's a really good point. Thank you for bringing it up. It can be that we're very resilient in certain particular concept, and then there is something that's difficult. That's why it can be really helpful when we get some guidance, to if you can access support in the university, or if you can talk to family or friends, or the people that you lean on to get their advice, because we can't be good at everything. It's a little bit like sport, right? I say I like swimming, I'm not that good a runner, but doesn't mean that I'm not fit. And it's the same for other people, I think. You can be very good at sorting out maybe, let's say, professional problems because you are very analytical, and it might be that your relation problems with your partner, your wife, your husband, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, can be something that you really struggle with. So I think that's quite normal, and that's why there is room for development. So yeah, I think that's a very common one. Thank you for bringing that up. It's not, because people often think of resilience, or you have it or you don't have it. And I think it's like assertiveness. In some situation you can feel resilient, and also sometimes it's the stress of it. If you have one thing to deal with, it's okay. If you have 5 things to deal with, it makes it very difficult to deal with things. So Youssef has raised his hand. Do you want to ask you? Very welcome,
Yes,
Ibrahim.
hello.
Hello.
Firstly, for this amazing session. So I have a
Thank you.
question regarding
Yeah.
Yes, how to overcome stress for athletes, especially before the game, like directly before the game. Like I have some athletes who throw up and don't perform well in the during the match. So how I
Yeah.
can do that?
Okay. Well, I think that's a really long question for me to answer in a few minutes, but I think if it's performance anxiety, so I think helping people, if you can have some one-on-one with them when you talk to them, yourself, and you try and see what is it that's difficult for them, because if you have a number of athletes who struggle, they might all have different reasons for struggling. So it's helpful to have those discussions and help them think through of different strategy. Often people put themselves under too much pressure. So it's about thinking, you can do your best, but it's not, it is helping to put it in perspective. It's you can do your best, but it's everybody's responsibility for winning the game. It's not just on one person. And is there anything that helps you? And trying to identify coping strategy for the things that they are finding difficult. Yeah. But I think
Yeah,
helping people to put things in perspective is really important, because people often might feel really stressed because they don't want to let their team down, or, they really struggle because of that.
yes. I think they are always focusing on the victory, not on performing the actual game. So I
Yeah.
always try to tell them, but I have some athletes that I don't know, they don't get it or they don't
Mm,
know how to deal with it. So that's
yeah.
my question.
No,
What
I think Youssef, that's a really good approach. You're not focusing on winning, you're focusing on the game. Go and have fun. Go and enjoy the game. Do your best. Yeah. And I think that's really important, because I think if you try and go and all you're thinking about is winning, it becomes very difficult. And helping them to kind of manage that. Like often when I run training for university, I might be saying, and I didn't say it this time when I said it, put it in the chat, but I always want to say, just think about participating and learning. Because if I tell you, learn, bring me question, there is no stupid question, you will have loads of ideas. If we were here and we're trying to solve a problem, I'd say, let's just brainstorm. What can we do to solve this problem? You'll come up with, I'm sure, there's 50 of you, you'll come up with 15 really good reasons. If I tell you, okay, now I want you to think really hard, what do you think is the best answer to that project? And that makes it impossible to think, right? If you want to think about doing the best answer to a problem, it stops people from being creative and thinking. So it's the kind of mindfulness bit element where you're focusing on the thing, you're focusing on the game, which is play your game, not focusing on the winning. Because if you're focusing on the winning, you're focusing on the future, you're not focusing on the moment. So that would be my answer.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Youssef, and good luck with the game. What sport is it that they're playing?
Yes, football, soccer.
Football. Soccer, yeah. No, I'll call it football as well. Well, good luck with the next game then. So is the implementation, Patricia is asking, is the implementation of wellbeing and wellness program and procedures in university accessible for students and employing for free? Or does it include direct or indirect fees, like, for example, using counseling or such service? Well, in the UK, all the universities I know, counseling is free at the point of access. But there is an indirect cost in that the university students in the UK pay a university fee. And if you the fee represent not just the studying, but access to all professional services. So the university, when they set their budget, they take into consideration that people will have counseling. But at the point of delivery, it's free. And I think that's really important, because if people have to pay when they come to counseling at the point of access, that might be the time when people are at the worst in their life, and they might have, like, big difficulties financially. Let's say somebody in their family died, and at that time they can't come to counseling because they haven't got the fee. Makes it really, really difficult. So I think personally, I think it's better if people are able to, even if it raises the fee for everybody, that at the point of access it's free. In my mind, that's important. Somebody's saying, while going through the difficulty, is it better to talk to someone professional or someone who you went through the same difficulty and overcame it. I don't think it's either or. I think it can be helpful in both ways. I've worked a lot with people with addiction problems, and I think it can be really helpful to go to a group with people who've experienced the same problem and talk, for instance, to other, drug users or drinkers. But there's also a place for people to talk to a professional who can help you to work out your own issues, because just because somebody's experienced something doesn't mean that they have the same problem as you. So that would be my.
Ms. Geraldine, I would just like to highlight that the counseling service at our university is for free as well for all the students, academic and
Very good.
administrative members. And even this week, all of the 23 sessions that are delivered to the whole community, whether from the university or from Lebanon or abroad, are free of charge as well, because we are aiming to be as healthy as possible and to help the community reach this goal.
That's really good.
So
I'm
we
glad to
do
hear it.
agree with what you are
I know.
saying.
It would have been awkward if it wasn't it? Me saying I think it's really important in me. But no, we're thinking along the same line. That's really good. So I'm glad to hear that. And it's
Exactly.
fantastic that you have a university counselling service. So I think we're coming towards the end of the session. So thank you very much for listening and all your kind messages. Somebody's
Thank
putting
you.
the details of
Yeah,
the counsellor in the chat. So that's really good.
exactly. The counselor of the university.
Yeah.
Ms. Geraldine, I would like to thank you again for your time. It was lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we will hopefully collaborate in future
Yeah.
projects as well. I will also leave for all the attendees a feedback survey in the chat box. It takes 1 minute. We would really appreciate if everyone can add their input, and then surely I will share them with you. And as I said at the beginning of the session, we will hopefully welcome you in Lebanon one day and get
That would be
to
brilliant.
meet you in person rather than virtually.
Yeah.
Thank
that
you
would be
again
very
so
good.
much.
Thank you very much. Bye bye, everyone, and good luck. Bye.